know more about what has been done over actually the last 100 years right here in the United States. So that's what we'll talk about today. So first I want to play a video of a presidential candidate in 2008, just before the election.
5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
Okay, so that was candidate Barack Obama. He said we're 5 days away from the election, and he said 5 days away from fundamentally transforming America, which is a very interesting statement. Usually, if you love your country, or let me give you an example. If you're in love with somebody, you're married to someone, for instance, and when you were first blessed to them, if you said, I want to fundamentally transform you, I want to fundamentally change you, how would your husband or wife feel about that? It means you're dissatisfied with them. Okay, so anyway, he wanted to fundamentally change America. So let's see what he was about. So Barack Obama attended a college in Los Angeles called Occidental College. So I did a little bit of research, and they have kind of unusual department in that college. It's called the Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice. So it says since 2006, the critical theory social justice major has graduated students with rigorous training in critical theory and transformative political practice. They instruct students in principles of Marxism, psychoanalysis, the Frankfurt School, deconstruction, critical race studies, queer theory, feminist theory, post-colonial theory. The department emphasizes the necessary relationship between critical thought and political action. So essentially what they're saying is they're indoctrinating their students or educating them in Marxist theory. Basically, meaning of critical means you criticize everything, okay? It's a basic process, method they use. And then then they send them out to go into the political area and to bring about change. So they educated him pretty well, I think. I think he. Anyway, let's keep on looking. So today's presentation, we're talking about the leftist attack on Western civilization. So now the Frankfurt School is pretty important for you to know about. So this was a school associated with the Institute for Social Research at Goethe University in Germany. And they had, most of these professors were left-wing, leftists in their thought, and they decided Marx had gotten it backwards. Instead of an economic revolution, Marx said the economic revolution has to come first, and that would lead to a cultural revolution. But they said, no, that's not happening. It's not happening in the West. So they decided only through a long march through the institutions of the West could they achieve their communist objectives. And the rise of Nazism in the 1930s, Germany, forced them to flee to America. And many of them were received at Columbia University in New York City, and they were teaching there for many, many decades. So Yeah, so they decided that the West was not vulnerable to a revolt of trade union workers. Their living standards were getting better and better, and they were really not interested in having a violent revolution. So, but they realized that the West was vulnerable to attractions of sex, racial division, other areas that they could kind of exploit. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And they decided that they needed to seize the cultural means of production, such as media, universities, and even churches. And their method, as I said before, is question everything, especially moral absolutes and the Judeo-Christian foundation. So divide and conquer, the 1% versus 99%, white versus black, men versus women, and seek social justice for the aggrieved groups and punishment for the enemy groups. That's kind of basically their model. Now, there was an important Italian communist named Antonio Gramsci, and he spoke about the idea of cultural hegemony, which means domination. So this is the idea that the dominant ideology of a society, the beliefs, explanations, perceptions, values, and morals, reflects that of the ruling class. The dominant ideology justifies social, political, economic status quo as natural, inevitable, perpetual, and beneficial for everyone, rather than as an artificial social construct that benefits only the ruling class. So basically, there's an ideology, values, beliefs in a culture. And the people think that the way the culture thinks is natural and the way it should be. But according to him, it's really just benefiting the ruling class. He also said, socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media, by transforming the consciousness of society. I mean, it's interesting. He was actually very explicit. He viewed socialism as a religion, as a belief system, which it is. It's not just an economic system. And then there was Herbert Marcuse, who wrote several books that were quite popular in Europe and America. And I remember when I was in college, I read one of his books, and other students were reading his books as well. So one of his books is called Eros and Civilization. And basically he was merging Marx and Freud, okay? So Marx spoke about economic liberation, and Freud, as I think many of you know, he believed that the main drive in human beings was the sex drive. And he said that with civilization, we repress our sexual desire. And when we do that, we express this sexual energy in culture and in, I guess, even business. We use this sexual energy and we direct it into something else, since the Christian civilization is saying you have to control your sexual desire, right? So he spoke about sublimation. Now, Herbert Marcuse would argue that actually it's not a good idea to repress your sexual energy or desire. He believed in free love, basically. You may have heard the term "make love, not war." Okay, that's kind of coming out of his teaching. So he said that advanced industrial society, modern capitalism, is preventing us from reaching a non-repressive society. So he believed this non-repressive society where we could have free love and we don't have to wait till marriage. Marriage is not important. It would be liberating for people. So I think for a lot of college students, they thought, wow, this is a great idea. I mean, I don't have to follow the Bible, which is not easy to do. And I can bring about a world transformation by having sex with women at my college. Also, he wrote another book called One-Dimensional Man. And he said that the people recognize themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their automobile, their hi-fi set, split-level home, kitchen equipment. So, I mean, this is, he was very critical of materialism, right? I mean, we have to understand that the leftists are extremely judgmental, and they really judge people by external things. I think if you walked into the home of an American who does have an automobile, a hi-fi set, a split-level home, and kitchen equipment, you might find that that person has many deeply held beliefs. I don't know about you, but I don't. The third blessing, God gave us the third blessing to have the right of ownership, right? But, I mean, are you defined by your car? Are you defined by the house you live in? I think that's kind of a very broad condemnation of American people. Maybe some people are very materialistic. I think many Americans, they're very patriotic. And do you see my point? So, like, very accusing, actually. Those who devote their lives to earning a living are incapable of living a human existence. Actually, I kind of agree with that. I mean, I would say if you're only focusing on earning a living, if that's the only thing you're doing, I mean, there are things that he's saying which actually I think are good points to think about. One-dimensional thought is systematically promoted by the makers of politics and their purveyors of mass information. You can see the media does kind of promote a certain viewpoint. I can see his point. But actually, it's usually leftist. It's not... And free election of masters does not abolish the masters or the slaves. So he thought that American democracy was a joke, basically. They're saying there's no real change. I guess for a communist, I guess you want to see violent revolution or, well, in his case, I guess a free love revolution. He also spoke about the idea of repressive tolerance. Tolerance is extended to policies, conditions, and modes of behavior which should not be tolerated because they are impeding, if not destroying, the chances of creating an existence without fear and misery. This sort of tolerance strengthens the tyranny of the majority against which authentic liberals protested. Liberating tolerance, then, would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. So he did not believe in free speech. He believed that leftists should be able to say whatever they want to, but we should prevent conservatives from speaking. So when a conservative speaker like Ben Shapiro or Dennis Prager, Candace Owens, Ayaan Hirsi Ali goes to a college campus, if the leftists don't like her, then they shout and scream and intimidate and bully to try to have them kicked off the campus. And they've been successful, but they're following his idea. It's a very anti-American point of view. It's a communist point of view. Now I want to talk about taking over the education system. You may know that John Dewey is recognized as the father of public education in the United States. So originally, government-funded education in the United States, it really came about because the Protestants were worried about a lot of Catholic immigration to the United States, and they didn't trust the Catholics. So they said, let's have government schools so we can educate the children of Catholic immigrants into American culture, quasi-Protestant culture. But actually, he took this in a whole new direction. So probably his most famous book is called Democracy in Education. It was published in 1916. He advocated pragmatism, experimentalism in the classroom. He said that all morality is social. Now, you think about that for a second. If all morality is social, that means that we ourselves can decide what is good or bad, right? Is that what the Bible says? No. So he's really rejecting any type of traditional morality. The group, the collective decides what is moral, which is basically the leftism kind of guiding the group, okay? So he said that we should see students as part of the collective, to be influenced through socialization. So his kind of education is very strong in public schools. I think I mentioned this. In many classrooms, the students no longer face the teacher. They're around a desk and they're looking at each other, and the teacher goes around as a facilitator. And actually, the quality of the education in American public schools is actually quite low. It used to be that a high school graduate in the United States had knowledge that would be comparable to a college graduate. So there's a dumbing down of the main purpose is not necessarily education in history and math. I mean, they do teach these subjects, but the main purpose is to socialize the children into, I would say, leftist ideology. And you can see this when there was the scare about the shooting in Parkland, Florida. Many schools allowed their students to go out and demonstrate. They said, you don't have to come into school. You can go out and you can go to the demonstration. Now, if they want to go out for a pro-life rally, I don't think they would have let them go, okay? But it was for a leftist purpose. And he said that religion instills a slavery of thought and sentiment. Christianity is a dying myth. This is the father of public education in America. Now, in 1933, he signed the Humanist Manifesto, which declared that the universe is self-existing and not created. So he's an atheist. Okay, so American education is quite hostile, actually, to Christianity, actually. He said that economic determinism is now a fact, not a theory. Education must bring about a new social order. When you send your children to school, do you think that you sent your child to school to create a new social order? Is that why you sent your children to school? No, of course not. But the father of public education says that's what the purpose is. And most parents don't know what their children are being taught. Actually, one good thing about this lockdown, children are at home and they're being educated through the computer, through Zoom, right, online. Many parents can see what their children are being taught, actually. Okay. Now, he said that change must come gradually. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction. So he strategically, he said, we don't want to be too aggressive because if the parents find out what we're actually doing, they won't like it. So the teachers are trained in a certain type of education that has an agenda, but the parents really, they never find out. And the Rockefeller Foundation gave Dewey millions of dollars to create an experimental school to put into practice collectivism, their idea of collectivism. Now, his books were translated into Russian by the Bolsheviks in the decade after the 1917 revolution. Now think about this. There was just this revolution led by communists in Russia. I'm sure that first 10 years after revolution was very chaotic, right? They didn't have a lot of resources, but they put effort into translating several of his books. They obviously thought that his books were very important for their revolution. And this is what the professor at the pedagogical department in Moscow Technical University, he wrote to John Dewey. Your works, especially School and Society and The School and the Child, have very much influenced the development of Russian pedagogy. So he was like a hero. He was a rock star in communist Russia. And he admired the revolution. He visited the Soviet Union in 1928, and he wrote a series of articles in the New Republic praising its revolution of heart and mind. The outstanding fact in Russia is a revolution involving a release of human powers on such an unprecedented scale that it is of an incalculable significance not only for that country but for the whole world. So he was a true believer in communism, at least at this time. Now, a few years later, he began to realize that he had been a dupe. Do you know what a dupe is? A dupe is someone who's been deceived, like a useful idiot. And so in 1934, he was observing Stalin's Great Purge, where Stalin was killing high-level leaders in the Soviet Union because he didn't want to have any competition. So John Dewey published Why I Am Not a Communist. All right. So this is what he wrote. Communist spokesmen harbored a systematic, persistent, and seemingly intentional disregard for fair play and elementary dishonesty in the representation of facts. I feel a little bit funny reading what he says. He didn't worry about that before, okay? But now he's worried about it. He said, the Soviets engaged in hysteria in their denunciations, attempted character assassination of their opponents, employed a policy of rule or ruin. And it sounds like the Democrat Party today. But anyway, I mean, at least he was able to kind of see actually what was going on. Now, Margaret Sanger, the founder of what is now called Planned Parenthood, who believed in eugenics she believed that black people and other races were inferior and they were weeds. They should be rooted out and exterminated, and we should just grow the European, the Aryan race. She was a racist, okay? And of course, she believes, she advocated widespread birth control and also abortion, obviously, right? So she went to Russia in 1934, and she said, Russia today is the country of the liberated woman. She said, unlike American women, Soviet women enjoyed the right to contraceptives and abortion. The attitude of Soviet Union Russia toward its women would delight the heart of the staunchest feminist, since equal rights are settled and accepted facts. She was an admirer of communism. Now, jumping forward, this is in the late 1960s. I want to share about some of the books that are very common in Western universities and read by students. I remember when I was a student in college, one of my fellow students was reading this book. So, in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian Marxist, he lamented that, like the peasants of Tsarist Russia, today's students are hobbled by a false consciousness. Their perception of themselves as oppressed is impaired by their submersion in the reality of oppression. Their vision of the new man or woman is individualistic. Because of their identification with the oppressor, they have no consciousness of themselves as persons or as members of an oppressed class. So he was complaining that students did not think that they were oppressed. I guess if you go to a college where you're free to study for 4 years, and your parents are supporting you to do that usually, you might be able to see why they think, I'm not oppressed, okay? I'm blessed. Anyone who lives in America lives in the 0.1% of the world population. Everyone who lives in America is blessed, okay? Not oppressed, okay? And that's a fact, okay? But the Marxists want to convince people that they are oppressed. It's quite amazing to see these people who have 4 years to study whatever they want. It's like an intellectual smorgasbord. And to read some of the great minds in history, and they think they're oppressed. It's absurd, actually. And he also wrote, for the oppressed to resist oppression actively in however bloody a manner does not constitute violence or terror. For violence is initiated by those who oppress, and it is not the helpless who initiate terror, but their oppressors. In other words, any action in service to class war, even violent action, is justified. So, in his view, it's okay if someone's driving down the street in Columbus, Ohio, just driving somewhere to go shopping. It's okay to attack that person and to rip them out of the car and destroy their vehicle and beat up that person if it's in the cause of liberation. Violence is justified. And his book has been used in many teachers' colleges throughout the world, actually. Now, just a few months ago, there was a high school history teacher. I think this was in Ohio, and she threw out her history textbooks, and she replaced it with this book here, A People's History of the United States. And this book has been used for many, many decades at university and high school level, widely. And the author is Howard Zinn. He was a professor at Boston University. He said, if people knew history, they would scoff at the idea that the United States is a force for the betterment of humanity. So the basic view of this book, of Howard Zinn's book, teaching young people that America is sexist, racist, xenophobic, and bigoted. Now, a book came out 2 years, a few years, I think 2 or 3 years ago, called Debunking Howard Zinn, exposing the fake history that turned a generation against America. So, many parents don't even know what this book is. They don't know that their children have been reading this book. And so let me just I recommend, if you're interested, you can read this or get an audio book, which I did. So Mary Graeber points out the real history, not the fake history that he was promoting. Columbus was not a genocidal maniac. He defended Indians. Native Americans were not feminist, communist, sexual revolutionists ahead of their time, which is what he was representing. The U.S. was founded to protect liberty, not white males' ill-gotten wealth. Americans of the greatest generation were not equivalent to Nazi war criminals. The Viet Cong were not well-meaning community leaders advocating local self-rule. The Black Panthers were not peaceful civil rights leaders. Actually, regarding the last point, there was a leftist named David Horowitz. His parents were communists. He grew up in a communist home. And he actually, in the 60s, he actually admired the Black Panthers. He thought they were a good group. And he found a bookkeeper to help them, to keep good track of their finances. Well, his friend, the bookkeeper, found out that they were misusing the money and using it for illegitimate and bad things. And they killed her. They killed the bookkeeper, who was a friend of his. So then he realized, and then all the other leftists that he knew in the United States, they were defending the Black Panthers, defending what they did. And then his eyes opened. He realized that everything he believed in was a lie. And actually, now David Horowitz, for many decades, he is probably one of the most brilliant anti-communists in America. And you can read his books. I really recommend his books. And he has a Front Page magazine website. There's a lot of good information there. So the point I guess I want to make is, as much as I hate what the communists teach, I do believe that there are some communists whose eyes can be opened. So I want us to remember that. I do not believe that if we're in a war, we may have to fight communists, but I do not believe in executing them, okay? And I believe that we should, they're spreading their ideas with lies and propaganda. We're lucky. We can just share the truth. We don't have to share propaganda because we can share what's actually true. Isn't that good? And we can show them that their ideals of realizing a better world can be accomplished not through Karl Marx, but through the teachings of Jesus Christ and true Father, Son, Young Moon, right? Absolutely. Okay. So, and then she points out Zinn's dishonest rhetorical tricks, slavish reliance on partisan history, which means fake history by leftists, explicit rejection of historical balance, selective quotes of sources to make them say the exact opposite of what their authors intended. It's propaganda, it's not history, but it's being used in schools all across America. Fake history. So now I discuss ideological attack on natural marriage. So Kate Millett was a leader in the feminist movement in America in the 60s and 70s. And she wrote, "When one group rules another, the relationship between the two is political. When such an arrangement is carried out over a long period of time, it develops an ideology, feudalism, racism, etc. All historical civilizations are patriarchies. Their ideology is male supremacy." And she wrote a book called Sexual Politics, which became a bestseller. And it was published in 1970. So she said that the failure of women to extricate from the patriarchy, which means male leadership, of the monogamous nuclear family reflected false consciousness. Having babies and taking care of them reduced women to the cultural level of animal life, in providing the male with sexual outlet and exercising the animal functions of reproduction and care of the young. Do you think that her view is... I don't think she had children herself, so I don't think she really knows much about this. It's a little bit biased. I think you would agree. Okay, so she attacked as fascistic and counter-revolutionary societies which emphasized family over sexual freedom. And she was praised by Time magazine as the high priestess and the Mao Zedong of the women's movement. Okay, now we know. And the New York Times said this is the Bible of the women's liberation. Okay. All right. Okay, now I need some volunteers. I need especially the Western women. I need you to, I want you to be an actor or actress for a consciousness raising session. Okay, I'm going to play the role of Kate Millett, and then you have to play the role of her disciples in the consciousness raising group. Okay? So let's get started here. Okay, this is a meeting that was reported by her sister from 1969. Okay, so she says, "Why are we here today?" Your turn. All right, little bit. Come on, sisters, ready? Come on, I want to hear that spirit, that revolutionary spirit. Okay, why are we here today? Okay, yeah, fist in the air is good too. Okay, what kind of revolution? Okay, and how do we make the cultural revolution? Okay, all right, by destroying the American patriarch, okay. And how do we destroy the American patriarch? And how do we do that? How do we destroy monogamy? Okay. All right, I don't think you don't get an A, but thank you for trying. Okay. All right. So, I mean, this is quite sad, obviously, and pathetic. But now, her sister actually wrote a book, and she actually. So I want to share what her sister wrote about Kate Millett. Her sister Melanie speaks tragically of encountering women in their 50s and 60s who fell for this creed in their youth and now cry themselves to sleep many countless nights grieving for the children that they will never have and that they coldly murdered because they were protecting the empty, loveless futures they now live with no way of going back. "Where are my children?" they cried to Mallory. "Where are my grandchildren?" And then another person said, "Your sister's books destroyed my sister's life." This kind of ideology that these women picked up in college, in many cases, it ruined their lives. Now, I just want to quickly mention about Harry Hay, pretty famous gay communist. He was a member of the Communist Party USA. He was pro-pedophilia, an activist in the North American Man-Boy Love Association, founder of the Mattachine early gay rights group. He founded the Radical Fairies, preaching two-spirit gender identity. So he's a forerunner of the transgender movement that we're stuck with right now. Mother Earth worship and environmentalism, okay? So he was actually pretty innovative in terms of going way beyond Karl Marx, in a way, you could say. But we see it today. This is an article from July 17, 2020, in the website of the Communist Party USA and People's World publication. It says, Black environmentalists are organizing against worldwide injustice. And you can see their sign there, policy change, not climate change. Okay, so, you know, the environmental movement is like a watermelon. On the outside it's green, but on the inside it's red, meaning it's communist. Many, you know, they're leftists, essentially. And they advocate the government taking over the entire energy energy production in a nation. If you control the energy, you control everything, basically, right? Everything needs energy. And then also in this trend, Christians are attacked as being anti-science. So this is an article in the New York Times. Donald Trump rose to power with the determined assistance of a movement that denies science, bashes government, and prioritizes loyalty over professional expertise. In the current crisis, we're all reaping what that movement has sown. Today, the hardcore of climate deniers is concentrated among people who identify as religious conservatives, Republicans. So 5 minutes, okay. So this is a gender-driven science, okay? I mean, they claim that they are scientific and conservatives and Christians are not anti-science. Baloney. I could say a lot, but I don't have time. So I'm going to keep on going. And we should all realize that expressing Christian beliefs in many countries is becoming against the law. So here's an example. In Finland, the Finnish police investigate a Lutheran minister for publishing a book calling homosexuality a disorder. And he was accused of incitement to hatred against a group for basically referring to biblical passages about homosexuality. So I think we need to understand that if Joe Biden is elected and the leftists and Democrats, communists take over the federal government, to be a Christian and to practice your Christianity and to want to speak about it, particularly in public, it will be against the law, basically. Leftist tactics are changing counseling and social work. You can see here, there's an article that came out March 24, 2020. There's a George Soros-funded website in the UK. The coronavirus crisis shows it's time to abolish the family. Okay. They're very explicit about what they want to do. Here we see Dr. Kenneth Zucker, a sexologist and psychologist who ran the Center for Addiction and Mental Health Gender Identity Clinic in Toronto for more than 30 years. So he's helped many, many young people who are struggling with, boys, whether maybe they thought maybe they were a girl or girls who thought they were a boy. In many cases, these girls are autistic and they have difficult relationships with other girls, and that's why they think, oh, maybe I'm not a girl, so they're confused. And his crime was suggesting that perhaps we should first try to help the children feel comfortable in their own bodies. Most of these young people who are struggling, by the time they reach 18, more than 80% of them come to accept that, you know, their bodily sex. But he was fired. He was fired after the transgender activists did a smear campaign against him. And this is the kind of intimidation that they're doing in many universities and many. This man was fired even though he knew more than all those activists put together. And there's really a war against God's ideal of creation. So in the book of Genesis, it talks about in the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them, right? This is how the design of creation. But they want to replace male and female with 72 genders, okay? It's part of their agenda to break down the family. Abolish traditional marriage. Masculinity is toxic. In Ohio, parents lost custody of their children, of their daughter, because they opposed the girl's decision to identify as a boy and transition to being male, meaning they were against her having surgery to cut off her breasts and giving her powerful hormones that would make her sterile. Okay, but they took her away from her parents. Okay, so we're going to finish right here. Hopefully we can continue tomorrow. So I've been told that I need to stop. Is that true, Tim? Okay. All right, I do want to say one thing about a different topic. It has to do with your travel to Trump rallies. Okay, and I mean, it's wonderful that we can go there and shout our support for Donald Trump. Okay.